Hi, it's Kim from the Shamrock Quilt Studio, and today we're talking binding, and I want to show you my favorite French fold binding. We'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back. Today we're talking about binding, and with a quilt you can put any kind of binding you want on it. Any color, any shape, any construction, it's all up to you. And there are many different kinds of binding. We've got a single fold bias tape you can use. We've got a double fold bias tape. We've got straight grain of fabric binding. We've got single fold and double fold and French fold, and we can put on a facing. We could put on a corded binding. We can do it by machine. We can do it by hand. There are just so many choices. And if you want to get really fancy, we can do things like curves and swags and prairie points, all kinds of things. But today we're going to talk about something very basic, one of my favorites to use. Typically, I prefer to machine stitch my binding on one side of the quilt, fold it over, and hand stitch it on the back. And my favorite kind is French fold. And French fold is a strip of fabric that we've sewn together into a long continuous strip, and we're going to fold it in half. We folded that in half, and then we're going to stitch it down on one edge. So we'd stitch it in our machine just like this, and then we're going to fold it over on itself and then fold it over the edge of the quilt. So you've got two layers of fabric on both sides of the quilt and on the fold, and that will give it two things. It'll give it more strength at the fold. It will also give it a little more filling in the binding area to make sure that it's nice and full, and you don't get a binding where it doesn't have anything in the middle. It feels empty. Some of my earlier quilts felt empty because I was trying to create with my binding what should have been a border. And so if you are looking for a look, I would recommend that you do that aesthetic choice in a border, and then just put your binding on to serve as your finish statement. Now, the good thing about French fold is when you make it, you're just going to cut it, sew it together, and fold it in half. And then when you use it, that's when you'll stitch it down and put it on the quilt. If you make this, what you end up with is something that looks like this. It's just a piece of fabric folded and pressed into that shape. And if you decide to go with a quilt with a wider border, I'm mixing up my words, a wider binding, you can simply come back and press the ends, both ends down, and then stick your quilt in here and either stitch it by machine or by hand, either one you want. So you've got a little bit of flexibility with this. The one we're going to do today, we're going to do at 3 inches wide cut. And I find that this is a good width. It allows me to cut it down if I need to, but if I don't, it will give me a binding that's somewhere probably between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 to 5/8 of an inch wide, depending on how thick my quilt is and where I sew it on. So let's get started with this. Now, what I've chosen to do today is I finally found a black and white stripe fabric with tiny little stripes. And I've been looking for something like this for a while, and when I want it, I can never find it. So I found it on sale. I went ahead and bought 1.5 yards, and I'm going to do enough binding probably for a regular size quilt. I think I'm going to go 300 to 400 inches total. And I'm going to make this, and I'm going to roll it around either a piece of cardboard or a tube, and just store it away until I need it. So the first thing I've done is I put my ruler on my fabric and got a nice perpendicular to the selvage cut. And then from there I've cut strips 3 inches wide. Now you're going to need to cut off your selvage in each of these cases. And because I'm kind of trying to match up these stripes, I cut everything at the top of a black stripe so that we can start matching them up. Now, what I have done is I have placed these so that the black stripe is the first stripe in the fabric on both this side and on this side. You see how, I wish I had something to point with. But you can see how that's just laying right on that black stripe here and then right on the black stripe here. And I've pinned those down so they're perpendicular, and I've drawn a line from the corner here to the corner here. And I'm going to stitch that. And we're going to stitch just right on that line. Now I don't know for sure that this is going to match up, but we're going to hope that it does, and we'll see just how close we got. Now, one thing about sewing this is you are likely to get a bird's nest if you sew off the beginning of the fabric. So I want to grab something. Oops, it fell on the floor. A little scrap of fabric. We're going to start up. And we just need a couple of stitches, because what we're trying to accomplish is we want to keep those threads up on top of the machine and not down into it. We don't want the machine to suck those threads down into the machine. Okay, stitching right across. I'm not back stitching. Okay, we want to see how this fits. Do a little test run. Take my pins out. And let's see how close we got to matching that pattern. Oh, that's just fabulous. It's not an absolute perfect match, but it is so close that by the time you fold that over, you're only going to see so very little of it that it's just really good. So that's our secret, is that the black stripe is the first up when they're matched up. And let's cut this little leader off, and we'll get ready for the next one. Okay, great, huh? Okay, so from there we're going to go ahead and take our pins out, and we're going to trim this up at 1/4 inch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the seam open, and then we're going to press it in half with the right sides out. And I'll show you that at the ironing board. I always struggle when I'm in here because you can never see me. But we'll just not worry about me and just pay attention to hear what's going on. So what I did was I pressed my seam in one direction, and then at that seam I'm going to start there, and I'm going to fold that piece in half, and then I'm just going to press it on the folded edge. Now, because this is a striped fabric, it's going to be really easy to match up where it should fold. A couple of things you don't want to do. You don't want to iron it, and by iron it, I mean this. You want to just press it. And then you also want to make sure that when you're pressing it, your strip stays straight. We don't want it to curve this way, and we don't want it to curve this way. We want to keep it straight. So I'm going to skip an area and press that. And then make sure that's straight. And we'll just hop it down there. Here at the end, we're pressing. Not our fingers, though. And almost got my fingers that time. We just hop it down. And you can steam it. I think steaming it will help it hold better. And I'm going to do the rest of this real quick. And a lot of times you find that urge to stretch it and curve it this way or curve it this way. Don't do that. That will make your binding uneven. Okay, we're coming up to another seam here. So I will press that. This is the one that was just a little bit out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the top, press it. Now we're matching up those stripes, remember? And I always have a tendency to curve it this way. So I want to be careful that I don't do that. Now, usually your fabric that you're going to run into is about 41 to 42 inches wide. So you can get 42, well, let's say 40 inches, 41 inches from each strip of fabric that you cut. And this is 3 strips. So we should be somewhere at 120 inches for just 3 strips of fabric. I want to be careful here that I'm paying attention. I want to get this lined up and I don't want to curve it. I know I've said that like 3 times, but that's going to be where your problem is going to be if you have a problem with your binding. Okay, so just in that little bit of time, we have about 120 inches of binding. So if we were going to do 400 inches, we need to do about 9 more strips, right? Maybe 8. You just have to see how much area you're going to take up with your seams. So I'm going to go back over to my work desk and I'm going to show you a couple of ways that I store it until I use it. Okay, so we're about a third of the way into our 400 inches of binding, but we've got to figure out how we're going to store it. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. If you just throw it into a drawer in a box or something, it's not going to hold up. And I find that trying to roll it around something like a paper towel or a toilet paper roll, it's much too small. You need something a little bit bigger. And I'll tell you, I don't even know, oh, I do know what this came in. This came in a Instapot I ordered, a lid for it, and this came around the handle. So it's unlikely that you'll have something like this. And this would be good because it's much bigger in diameter and you can roll it around. And then when you get to where you need to be, you could just clip it in place like that. That would be perfect. And that's going to keep that right where it needs to be. Now, could I put 400 inches on this? Maybe. I'm not sure. Let's see if we put 100. I think I could. And either if I can't make the clips work and they do make bigger clips, I could put a rubber band around it. You're just going to have to make sure that you line it up really nice and straight when you do it. Now, if you don't like that method, or you don't have some kind of roll that you can use, and you're probably not, the other option is to put it around a piece of cardboard. Ideally, if you had a little piece of foam core board, a little scrap, that would be great. I don't happen to have one, but I do have some cardboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half. And then I'm going to take a piece of Scotch tape and take the end of this and tape it onto the cardboard. And that's really just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to wrap this around the cardboard. Again, try not to stretch it. Now, you won't have to worry too much about stretching this because it's not bias. But if it's bias, you're going to really need to be careful. And when you run up here where you've joined these, go ahead and trim them off so you won't have to worry about that later. Keeps it neat looking. Now for 400, I would probably try to find a bigger piece of cardboard. I might even try to find some corrugated cardboard that was a little bit thicker, because the bigger it is, the easier it's going to go on there. And I'm going to just keep lining it up really straight on that. Okay, now I've come to the end. I've tried to keep it all level. And then what I can do with this is I can either put a clip on here. I could take a pin and just put a pin down in there, and that will hold them all together, and it will keep it on that cardboard. That's probably your best bet, is supplies that you already have. You can grab a piece of cardboard from a box you get from something you order. You could even use like a food carton and just use a couple of thicknesses of it to give you something to hold it on. That's right at about 120 inches, so if we had something bigger, I might go with a little bit bigger cardboard and maybe a little bit thicker as well to hold it. Now if it got so thick, if it got more than about that thick, I would say 3 inches, you might need to look at a bigger piece or splitting it in half. But just a few minutes and we've got 120 inches of bias tape that's ready to be put on a quilt. And see, when you look at it like this, it's not quite as big as you would think it would be, and I think it'd be a great size to put on as a binding. This particular quilt top here has about a 1/2 inch binding on it, just to give you a little bit of just slightly bigger than a 1/2 inch. So it's perfect size, I think, somewhere between 3/8 and a 1/2 inch. I hope this has been helpful to you. I've got a few more pieces, of course, that I need to do to get my goal done. I am trying to make a conscious effort to, when I'm looking for fabrics, go ahead and look for what kind of potential binding I need. A lot of times I work on a project and I get it all finished and I realize that I need the binding. And I go out looking and I either can't find anything appropriate, or I find it and it's priced very high, it's not on sale. So I'm trying to make an effort when I buy fabric to go ahead and look for binding. And one of the very first projects we're going to work on next year, I've already found the binding fabric. This is not it, but it's really close. So that will be the other thing that I'll be working on soon. As soon as I finalize the size of my project, then I'll go ahead and work on the binding for that. If you make about 400 inches, then you will be set for just about any size you need in your quilt. And you could always make more, especially if it's something you really like, or let's say you decide you want to make your signature part of a quilt, the kind of binding that goes on it, that you always want to use a stripe, you always want to use a dot, then just go ahead and get some of these made and put into your stash along with your fabrics. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. It's been helpful to you. If you like this, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.